Today's subject is designing and creating your own appliance covers. I'm going to be making one to pop over my recently deep cleaned Bernina sewing machine. This belonged to my grandma, and having put a lot of work into restoring it, I want to keep it deep down clean. But this could be for your toaster, your blender, or anything that needs such protection. This process is cheap. I started with this 52 by 90 inch vinyl tablecloth from Big Lots. This was $4 and I got 3 covers out of it. So that's very inexpensive. And it's just a lot of high quality, pretty vinyl for the money. Start by taking the roughly rectangular measurements of the object that you want to cover and be slightly generous. We don't want this to be a tight fit or it'll be hard to get on and off. A sewing machine is an example of something we might cover that isn't a pure rectangle. So make sure you take the outside measurements, not the ones in a narrow spot. These are the dimensions that I've decided on. 16 inches wide, that's across the front of the machine, 9 inches from front to back, and 12.5 tall. Obviously, I did not succeed in drawing my diagram to scale, but I must cut the fabric to scale. Here's the shape I need, and everywhere there's a corner like this one, it will get seamed. This piece to this piece, this to this, this to this, and this to this. And that should leave me with the shape of cover that I'm after. If I decided to cut it just like this, I would also need to add seam allowance. But I think for stability, I will just square it off and leave this extra fabric in the corners to strengthen the whole thing a little bit. And that means I can sew exactly on these lines. So I'll need to add up every dimension across here, which is 12.5, 16, 12.5, and every one across here, which is 12.5, 9, 12.5, and cut my rectangle that size. When I total up all my numbers, I come up with 34 for this dimension and 41 for this dimension. And I've been debating whether to allow for a hem, because this fabric doesn't actually require it. But I think I will add a total of 1 inch, so that'll be a ½ inch all the way around. I'm thinking that hemming it will make it sturdier, and I'm going to give that a try. So I'll be cutting my rectangle 42 by 35 inches. I have these dimensions to work with. Sometimes they're nominal dimensions, the measurement made before any hemming that the company did, but even so, I have ample room and can get more than one cover out of this big tablecloth. Here's the fabric. It has this kind of fuzzy back and a completely smooth and waterproof front. And as you can see, I won't be able to cut all the way to the corner because they have rounded it off, and I need a square shape, well, rectangular. In order to position the seams, I'm using water washable marker. There it is over there. It writes just fine on the back of this material. I could wash it out if I wanted, but it's not going to show. And for my 16-inch dimension, I've folded across the opposite dimension so that at the center I can measure out 8 inches, mark it in several places, and there's my 16-inch line. It's coming this way. That's half of it. Now I'll do the same with the other dimension, folding the fabric in the other direction. Here we go for clarity. This represents the whole piece of fabric, the wide dimension, the narrower dimension. Half of the wide dimension is 21 inches, and when we fold it down here, that will allow us to measure our 8 and 8 to get our 16-inch width. Another diagram is coming. Now our piece of fabric is folded. The fold is at the left. On the right, the two edges align, and measure out from the fold as many times as you need to, straight across. If you need to do something to make sure you're measuring at a right angle, you can do something as simple as laying a book along the fold. The corner will be 90 degrees and run your ruler out along the edge of the book. Or you may have a proper tool for doing this. But measure enough points that you can scribe a straight line. The orange line is 8 inches from the fold. Then I'll flip it over and do the same thing. Well, let's just pretend we flipped it over. This is now the other side of the fabric. And when we open it back up, this is the same piece of fabric opened back up again. And now we have our 16-inch span that goes across the width of the machine, marked neatly in the middle of it. So we'll repeat the same operation to get the other dimension. This time we'll fold along this dotted line, making 17.5-inch segments, because that is half of 35. If your dimension is different, and it's almost certain to be, it'll be half of whatever yours is. We'll just say yours is 40, the whole thing. So this would be 20, and this would be 20. And what we're going to measure along here, out from the fold, and this time we can use our nice already parallel orange lines to help us, will be whatever the top dimension is supposed to be. Actually, it'll be half of whatever the top dimension is supposed to be. The distance from the fold that I measure out is half of 9, 4.5. My goal is a 9-inch distance across each end of this rectangle. And now you can see that delineated, this rectangle will end up sitting on top of the appliance. This will be the front, the back, an end, and this area, in each case, will be hidden in the seam. I want you to understand there's nothing mysterious or fancy about this. It's just a simple low-tech way of making sure that we get the rectangle that needs to describe the top and actually the bottom of our cover neatly centered on the piece of fabric. Here's our 16-inch wide, 9-inch deep rectangle sitting right on top of the sewing machine when finished. There are my marks that will finish lining off the 9 by 16 area. 16, 9. I've got to draw this line, and that will finish it. Now align the straight edge with this line. It'll be the fold at the top of the machine, but from there on where it extends, this will be a stitching line. 8 places to extend the line. 1, 2 on each corner. So there's 3, 4, and across the way 5, 6, and 7, 8. And the seam will begin here. These edges, not edges, but these 2 lines will touch, and we'll seam along them. With those lines extended, we can then bring this line to this line, and we will stitch right along the lines, making a corner of the cover. It would be difficult to be sure you were getting the seam correct because you can't see through to the back side, but this line of pins will help because I'm going to do it before sewing and make sure that I do have the lines aligned by checking the back of my pins. And then we can just follow this orange line knowing the 2 are stacked up nicely. Here's a case where my first position and guess is not perfect. So I know that I need to slide the fabric in relation to the other side of the fabric and put the pin in again. Top layer needs to slide that direction a little bit. Let me try again. Better. It's as easy as that to get it right. Doing a quick test fitting before we sew. Looks like it's going to be just right. Of course, those corners are sticking out now, and they won't be forever. You can see the pinning line. So let's stitch. I choose the longest stitch possible for vinyl. Stitch slowly, removing the pins as you go. All 4 seams are sewn. So next I'm folding these big corner flaps down and stitching them along the bottom. I decided not to leave the whole triangle sticking out, but to fold it under part way. So there are several layers here, but this stitch is just fine. You may prefer to trim away the excess fabric in the corner at this time, and that would be fine too. I chose to leave mine for stiffening, but either is acceptable. I'm using ordinary zigzag foot but straight stitch and ordinary tension without any problems sewing this vinyl. Another quick test fitting, and it's looking good. I've turned under the lower edge, but I haven't stitched it into place yet. So I think I'll go ahead and do that now. This is our finishing touch. And here it is. The entire thing took less than an hour and is very protective and not bad looking. Mine cost me about $1.50, but these tablecloths go on sale seasonally, and you may even get a better deal.